Every drawing action that you do in AutoCAD requires some form of data input, regardless of the type of geometry that you create. You're constantly inputting data in one form or another. So what we're going to do in this lesson is we're going to look at the different ways that we put data into AutoCAD. And what you'll find is that the concepts that we're going to learn here are going to take us all the way through. Sort of everything that you do is going to be based around what you're going to learn now in this tutorial. So what I'm going to do here is just very quickly click on the line tool. And what we're going to see here is there are three different ways that we can put data in. Okay, so say for example I want to come to my line tool. I've just clicked on line tool there, and I've moved my cursor into the drawing area. And the first thing that you'll notice, actually before we even start talking about the data, is the fact that just by the cursor we've got the word specified point, and then we've got two values, and they seem to be sort of jigging around and changing as I move the cursor. And what they are is they are showing us first of all our X, and that's in the white, and then our Y, which is in the sort of slightly light grey box. So that's our XY position. And what I need to know before I even put any data into AutoCAD is what is the position of my cursor and where do I want my line to start from. So this type of coordinate system is called a Cartesian coordinate system. And obviously every object that you place in the scene is going to be relative to this Cartesian coordinate system, or rather is controlled by it, certainly. Even though you may well be putting a line in terms of its first point being an XY position and its second point being an XY position, you can also input geometry using something called polar coordinates, but even then they need to have a starting point. So your polar coordinate is based around distance and angle, but obviously it's distance from where, and that where has to be a starting point, and that starting point is obviously going to be defined by your XY position. So everything that we do is going to come back to sort of this little bit that you've got here in front of you. You may notice as well that these values are being mirrored down here in the bottom left of the screen. And you'll notice that we've got two values and then we've got a 0.0. And obviously the 0.0 is because we're working in just 2D, we're not working in 3D, so our Z component, which is the last one, isn't taken into account. And please bear in mind, wherever you see values like this, you see one value, then another one, and then possibly another one, it always goes in the alphabetical order. It always goes X, Y, Z. Okay, always X, Y, Z, always like that. So this is why you'll find that sometimes you'll see values like this down in the bottom corner here, the drawing coordinates, and they don't have X, Y, and Z marked on them. It's because the order that they go in is so ingrained in the way that we work that eventually you get to a point where you just don't need to put X, Y, and Z because we need the space on the user interface. So do bear that in mind whenever you see things, that we're working with an XY coordinate system. There is Z if we go into 3D, but basically every point has to start from a point somewhere on the screen. And the way that we're going to put that in is either going to be through our command panel down here or through our icons up at the top. So I clicked an icon up there to create my line. I'm going to escape out of that. Bear in mind that escape will give you a way of getting out of every tool. If you're ever stuck in AutoCAD, you're not quite sure where to go, just keep pressing the escape key until you get back to this cursor. It sounds a little bit silly, but it is absolutely true. So that was one way of inputting data, by creating the line. The next way would be to come down here into my command panel and actually type the word line and enter. And I've then got an option that I can start my first point either from clicking anywhere in my viewport, or I could come down here and I could say, well, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my start point at 800, 800. And you can see that I've now got a line, and it starts here, and the point that it starts from is 800, 800. And if you look in the bottom left-hand corner, although I'm not completely on 800, 800, it's close enough to sort of prove the point. What we now have is an option as to how we move forward. You notice that when I specified my point, I did 800, 800 when I was writing in the command panel. Well, I've kind of got another couple of different ways that I can work now. One of the ways that I spoke about is I can either continue on, and I could click down in here and I could say, well, actually my next point is going to be 100 units on from that, so it's going to be 900. Let's click down here, actually 900 comma, let's see, come on, let's have this, specify next point, there we go. Number lock is on, 900 comma 900. So I could do it that way. You can see there, that's given me my line. It's going to be at probably a 45-degree angle. But I've also got my line which hasn't stopped working. I've also got here two options. I've got a value which talks about a distance, which is the first one that's highlighted, and also some degrees as well. So if I want to talk about, how far my line is going to be, say I've got a wall, and that wall is going to be a distance of 500, I can use my dynamic input that we're seeing here by typing in 500, and then instead of pressing comma, I'm going to press the tab key, and you'll notice that now my distance of 500 is locked, and I'm trying to find an angle. Now also notice that if I push up, I have an angle of 36 degrees, but if I push down, I also have an angle of 36 degrees, okay? Now, that's because we've got these polar coordinates, and it's really just an angle. It's relative to this 0 degree, and the 0 degree angle is very much what you would think of as being 3 o'clock on a watch. As I move around in a counterclockwise position, now this is what AutoCAD thinks, despite the fact that I've got a positive 50 degrees here, a positive angle there. As I move around counterclockwise, okay, you'll see now that I've got a third piece of information up here, and it says polar. It's giving a value of 845, despite the fact I've locked off 500. But it's also saying at 90 degrees. Okay, so if I come round, it says at 180, and this is where it's going to depart from what we're seeing on the screen here. My polar, the grey thing that's given me the value of 348.9217, that's at 270 degrees. Okay, that's because we've got this absolute degrees, set of degrees that go around from 3 o'clock on a watch hand, and they obviously go all the way around, and they get to 360. And where we are now, which is pointing directly down, is on that basis is 270 degrees around a 360 degree circle. But of course, we've also got this relative thing going on. And the relative is saying that, well, actually, that's 90 degrees pointing down. That's absolutely fine. You can put in 45 degrees here. So if I get that to 45 degrees, there we go. But what you'll find is that that will actually be whatever 270 is plus 45. So, hang on a minute, 315. So if I was to now decide I want 45 degrees pointing in that direction, there we go, that's my angle. Okay, and I've got a continuous drawer on here. So we've got those couple of different ways that we can sort of look at basically putting in our data. But you'll also notice that I've got this thing specify next point or, and then there's a little down arrow. Okay, now that down arrow means that we have got extra options here as to how we're going to input our data. So I can right click on that, and I've got some options here. Okay, I can just do a recent input, which would take me back to 800, 800. I can close where I want it to go. I can use a quick count. So if I just press close, it actually takes me back to the first position that I started drawing from. So that's always something that's worth looking for, is that no matter what object you're going to create, and we will look at all the other options for objects in a moment, that you will always have a right-click menu there. Once you've started that tool and you've started that basic drawing tool, you're always going to have a right-click menu. And in fact, that's true of your modified tools as well. So whenever you're working, just stop and think for a moment, maybe what's on the right-click menu. If you're unsure, just right-click and have a look.